The common misunderstanding of language as merely a process of naming things is criticized for several reasons. Firstly, it assumes that pre existing ideas exist before words, which is not always the case. Secondly, it does not clarify whether a word is purely a vocal expression or has psychological significance as well. Thirdly, it oversimplifies the process of linking a word to its corresponding thing. This simplistic view does offer some insight by highlighting that a linguistic unit consists of two components, a concept and a sound image. The sound image is not just the physical sound itself, but the impression it leaves on our senses, making it a psychological entity. When we speak or recite internally, we are engaging with these sound images without necessarily moving our lips or tongue. It is important to recognize that terms like phonemes should be reserved for spoken words only, as they imply vocal activity. We should refer to the sounds and syllables of a word, remembering that they represent the psychological impression associated with the word. The linguistic sign consists of two parts, a signifier and a signified, which are closely linked and bring each other to mind. When we consider the meaning of a word like arbor in Latin, we are only concerned with the associations established by that language, ignoring other possibilities. There is a terminological issue here. Saussure refers to the combination of a concept and a sound image as a sign, but commonly, sign is used to describe only the sound image, such as the word arbor. It is important to remember that arbor is called a sign because it represents the concept of tree, so the idea of the sound image implies the entire linguistic sign. To eliminate confusion, it would be helpful to use different terms for the three key components involved. Saussure suggests keeping sign to represent the whole concept and replacing concept and sound image with signified and signifier respectively. These new terms highlight the contrast between them and their role as parts of the whole. The term sign remains unchanged because there is not a better alternative in ordinary language. The linguistic sign, as defined, has two fundamental characteristics which establish the basic principles for studying this subject. First, the arbitrary nature of the sign. The connection between the sound of a word and its meaning is completely random. When we say sign, it means the whole idea formed by combining the sound of a word with its meaning. So we can simply state language signs are random. For example, the correspondence between a word and its sound has no inherent reason why it could not be represented by a different sequence of sounds. This is evident from the differences in languages. For instance, the word for ox is represented by different sounds or different sides of a border. While everyone agrees that language signs are arbitrary, recognizing the full extent of this principle takes time and effort. It affects many aspects of language study, even if its implications are not obvious. Once semiology becomes a science, it might debate whether it should include natural science like pantomime. However, its main focus will still be on systems based on the arbitrary nature of science. Essentially, all forms of expression in society rely on collective behavior or convention. For instance, even though polite gestures may seem natural, like when a Chinese person bows 9 times to the emperor, they are actually governed by rules. It is these rules, not the gestures themselves, that dictate their use. Signs that are completely arbitrary, like language, best exemplify the semiological process. This is why linguistics, being the most complex and widespread system of expression, can serve as a model for other branches of semiology. The term symbol is sometimes used to refer to the linguistic sign, or more specifically what Saussure calls the signifier here. However, this goes against the principle that language is arbitrary. Symbols are not entirely arbitrary. They carry some inherent meaning. For example, the symbol of justice, like a pair of scales, could not be replaced by just any other symbol, such as a chariot. When we say a linguistic sign is arbitrary, we do not mean that the speaker can freely choose any signifier they want. In reality, once a sign becomes accepted in a language community, individuals cannot just change it however they please. What we mean is that the choice of the signifier is unmotivated. It does not have a natural connection with the signified. Saussure addresses two objections that could be raised against the first principle. First, onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeic words are ones that sound like the noises they represent, like gluck gluck or tick tock. Some people might think these words show that the choice of sounds in language is not always arbitrary. But actually, true onomatopoeic words are pretty rare, and they are often just approximate imitations of sounds. For example, words like glass might sound like what they represent in French, but their origins show they weren't always like that. Glass comes from the Latin word for sound of a trumpet, so their current sounds are just a result of how language sounds have changed over time. Even the more authentic onomatopoeic words are chosen somewhat randomly. Once they are part of the language, they go through the same changes as other words, like how pigeon comes from a Latin word that was originally an imitation of pigeon's call. So even though onomatopoeic words might seem like they have a natural connection between sound and meaning, they actually end up being just as arbitrary as any other word in a language. Second, interjections. Interjections are words or sounds we use to express emotions or reactions, like ouch or wow. Some people think interjections prove that there is a natural connection between sound and meaning in language, but that is not really true. If we look at interjections in different languages, we see they can be quite different. For example, the French word ouch, does not have an exact equivalent in English. Instead, we say ouch. We also know that many interjections used to be the words with specific meanings. For instance, the French interjection diable, damn, comes from the phrase mort Deo, God's. So even though interjections might seem like natural expressions of reality, they actually vary a lot between languages and often have historical origins that are not related to their sounds. The second principle that Saussure suggests is the linear nature of the signifier. Firstly, the signifier, being auditory, unfolds over time. This means two things. It represents a span or a length of time, and this span is measurable in a single dimension like a line. This might seem obvious, but it is actually really important. Auditory signifiers, like spoken words, can only be perceived over time, unlike visual signals, which can convey information in multiple dimensions simultaneously. When we write down words, we represent them as a sequence of symbols on a page, which reflects their sequential nature in time. Even when we stress or accent a syllable, it is still part of the same continuous flow of sound. So even though it might seem like we are putting more emphasis on certain parts, it is all part of the same single flow of sound.